Hello, everybody. Welcome to Popcorn Planet. I'm Andy Signor, and it's time to review Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Now, look at this poster. Look at Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers. This just looks so good. We could all use a little kindness in theaters this Thanksgiving. It's just brilliant marketing. The world's most nicest actor, Tom Hanks himself, playing a legend, a icon for so many people. Mr. Rogers, a character, really a person, but a character in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that was just such an important person for a lot of children's lives. Really just knew how to stay not only in the middle, but just kindness and no matter what he did. We need him now more than ever. It's true. So I went into this movie excited and hopeful that this was going to be just an amazingly well done tearjerker to inspire people to remember the lessons of Mr. Rogers. And sadly, the film isn't really about Mr. Rogers. For those that already know, I knew this going in, but I didn't know the extent of how much it's not about Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is a central character in the film, but the film follows him being interviewed by a reporter. Lloyd Vogel is what they call him in the piece. But the movie is really Lloyd Vogel's story. Lloyd has to do a profile for Mr. Rogers in Esquire, which was a real story. You can go read the article in Esquire. Can You Say Hero was a real article they did you can find it here. It's a really in-depth and interesting article. I don't want to really get into the in-depth of the article because it sort of spoils a little bit of what the movie is actually about. But the article it's written about obviously spurred the movie. So knowing that it's about this author who meets Mr. Rogers, he's a cynic. He doesn't really believe that the character is real. And he's going through his own problems with his own family, father, life. And I related to some of that as a journalist of some point, entertainer, whatever you want to call me, influencer, person online. I related to sort of that character of Lloyd for sure a bit, but I also just didn't. When I went into a movie about Mr. Rogers, I didn't really want to watch this movie about a down and out reporter who's just sort of, I related to the struggle of sort of, telling the story and cynicism and stuff like that. But I related to him sort of struggling as being a parent. I had those. Obviously, we all have that when you become a father. There's a lot of this stuff that he relates to. And there's some interesting, for sure, the best part of the movie is when the two of them are together. But the movie really follows Lloyd Vogel. And that's something you guys need to be prepared for because it's not just the Mr. Rogers story. And I think a lot of us are expecting that based off of the amazing documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which really does go into more depth about Mr. Rogers. But this film isn't a live action adaptation of sort of the history of Mr. Rogers at all. It does give you a lot of insight about Mr. Rogers. But it's definitely more of a sort of trying to be a touching story about him finding a broken soul and sort of enjoying trying to fix it. And there's a little bit of a creepiness to it if you want to see it in that way. And even sort of it happens. But at the end, you realize it's all in good intentions. But you wonder how many people did Mr. Rogers seek out to try and help. And I take it back. It's creepy. I mean, someone could see it as creepy. Lloyd even jokes that it sort of seems creepy at the point. But you wonder, Lloyd questions Mr. Rogers. He's tasked with doing a profile on him, a short profile. And as soon as he meets him, he's like, this guy can't be for real. This guy's too nice. What's the deal? There's something behind it. There's something that set him off. There's something that makes him angry. And there's moments where he sort of pushes Mr. Rogers in the sort of the interviews throughout the movie. And Tom Hanks does a really good job. And that's where the movie shines. But then when Mr. Rogers says, see ya, and then the guy goes home and we follow him and his family and everything else, it becomes a much less interesting movie. And, it just doesn't work. Beyond that, the director does a bunch of weird style choices. The film, let me start in a pro. Tom Hanks is wonderful as Mr. Rogers. And the whole movie starts like an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And at first I thought, okay, well, this is cool. For those that didn't watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, it's a very slow, show. It's there to sort of just really sit there and have a discussion and not have cuts and cartoons. And it's just he's there to listen and talk and have a moment with you, be present with you. That's really the sort of the real importance of why Mr. Rogers was so good, because he's there for little children, listening to them. And that's what made him so great, is he could talk to any child. And there's moments of that, of kids visiting set, and you see him doing that. And so the film starts with sort of the show. And you're like, all right, cool, interesting. And then the show morphs into this weird format of him telling the story of Lloyd Vogel as Mr. Rogers in an episode of the show. And it just becomes weird. And the tone shifts a lot back and forth. And this sort of directing style, which is trying to do something, ends up missing the mark for me, and just becomes some weird choices the director makes in telling the story, which is a slower sort of story about a reporter who's lost his way, and Mr. Rogers sees it and tries to help him. And it's there's a story there, but I don't think it works, sadly, in the way the director and the script sort of tell it. Again, I got to give high marks for Tom Hanks, though. He's great. I would have watched him as Mr. Rogers even longer, and I'm sad the movie didn't focus more on that. At the same time, it's nice to see, I guess, one bookended story of a soul he helped. But I think there's so much more to Mr. Rogers' story, and there's so much more wisdom that could have been shared that they gloss over. Focusing only on Lloyd Vogel gives it, a point. But I don't think it's the strongest point that this movie on Thanksgiving, trying to remember us of the kind words of Mr. Rogers, really deserved. So sadly, I don't love the movie. I enjoyed parts of it. I love Tom Hanks in it. I think he's fantastic. He does the best he can do. And I loved the moments where he's interviewing Lloyd. But every time Tom Hanks leaves the scene, the movie dips, and you just need to be prepared for that. I think some people will still enjoy this movie. It's a heartwarming tale, but sadly, it's not the Mr. Rogers story I think a lot of people are expecting. And beyond that, it's told in a weird format that going back and forth from the show, and then the fake show, and then Lloyd's story, and I wanted to like it so much more than I did. It's hard to sort of clarify because I also am not trying to spoil sort of plot beats of where it goes, even though it's pretty hard to spoil. It's a heartwarming story. Clearly it's all going to work out in the end. But yeah, that's where I'm stuck. It's not, I didn't want a live adaptation of the documentary. Don't get me wrong, but I wanted to see Tom Hanks sort of more of history of Mr. Rogers. There's a lot of stuff he's done, and I'm sure there were struggles he had, and sort of the questions Lloyd asks are relevant, are fair and relevant, and it would have been interesting to see Lloyd. One of the best moments is Lloyd sort of questions him and says, "Man, Mr. Rogers must have been tough for being Mr. Rogers being your dad. It must have been really difficult for your kids." And he sort of says it challenging to Mr. Rogers in one of the interviews, and Mr. Rogers sort of takes it for a moment and goes, "Yeah, it was." And there's like this moment there where he sort of is very honest and candid and replies back and knows he's prodding and getting sort of trying to get him to react. But he doesn't take the bait and instead gives him some real truth. And it's like those moments just made me want to see more of that as a movie where it's like, well, let's go see that. And it doesn't deliver any of those moments. It just focuses on Lloyd's story and Mr. Rogers helping Lloyd and his family. And it's good. It's fine. It's a movie I don't think you need to see in theaters. It's a movie you could watch on HBO Go, Max, whatever platform it ends up being by the time it comes out. It's just it's a nice at home date movie or watch with the kids. Not older kids for the message of it, but it's not something you need to rush out this Thanksgiving, and that's where I think they failed. This should have been a movie that we were all like, oh, you got to go watch the Mr. Rogers movie. It's so touching and inspiring, and sadly misses the mark for me. What do you guys think? Are you going to watch it? Is this something, were you Mr. Rogers fan? I'd love your feedback. Hit me down in the comments below or on social media. Thank you as always for watching, and stay tuned for more Nerd Wars Tuesday and Thursday, which are turning into a lot of fun. We do it live 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, again, Thursdays and Tuesdays. So hope to see you there. And stay tuned for channel memberships. There's going to be some cool stuff happening on this channel. Lots, and the hype's coming. Hype train's coming. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching. Have an awesome day, everybody. Bye.